It's the top of a new hour, 6 o'clock here on the West Coast, 9 o'clock there in Washington. Live now look over the U.S. Capitol at the moment. I want to put this up from Lucas Tomlinson, our friend there at Fox. He said the flyover was canceled due to bad weather ahead of Biden hosting the NATO leaders at the White House. We were told that some F-16s and F-22s were going to fly over the National Mall on the occasion of the NATO summit, but it's been scrapped because it's been pretty nasty weather there in the D.C. area tonight. You see there the Capitol and at the White House as well. Well, we want to talk more about some of the key objectives coming out of the NATO summit, specifically with regard to the war in Ukraine. We're going to do that with our friend, national security analyst and expert, and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you here. The NATO summit is well underway, and I would argue, maybe you agree, a lot of news coming out of it with regard to the war in Ukraine. We got the news just yesterday, this joint statement that the United States, in addition to several NATO partners, are committing more air defense systems to Ukraine. We also got the news today that the United States, in addition to other partners from NATO, have said, Hal, that F-16s will be in Ukrainian skies by the end of the summer. That's huge. I want to put this up from Christopher Miller there, saying F-16s are on the way to Ukraine, being transferred now and will be flying before summer's end, according to the U.S. Zelensky confirms in a statement below and thanks the U.S., Denmark, and the Netherlands for the donations of the fighter jets here. So I would say pretty busy NATO summit so far, right, Hal?
Andrew, I would say it's extremely busy, but it was interesting. The F-16 comment, I heard it three different ways today. Actually, Secretary Blinken was sitting there and he said they're being transferred as we speak, or are being in the process of being transferred, which sounds like, okay, so they're actually going into Ukraine, or they might actually be sitting somewhere on the tarmac in Ukraine. And then he quickly followed up with, and they'll be flying over the skies of Ukraine this summer. So it wasn't entirely clear for a lot of today whether they were actually in Ukraine, going to Ukraine, flying over Ukraine, but they hadn't landed yet. It was I was trying to parse it to figure out what it is. As near as I can figure, this week there's some politics here. They made the decision to start transferring the planes over this week. For obvious operational security reasons, we won't have specifics on that. They're going to keep a very close hold, because if you think we're paying attention to it, you bet the Russians are paying attention to it.
I see.
All last week and the week before, they kept hitting every air base they could think of that might host F-16s, just to make sure the Ukrainians understood what they were going to do. And so I imagine this is one of the most closely guarded secrets in NATO right now, is where are the F-16s going to Ukraine? But that's a big change. And of course, the transfer of weapons. You know, one of the big things that's been kind of burbling out there is there's about 8 Patriot batteries that Israel bought. And you would think with Israel, with all the problems they have with the threat from Iran and Hezbollah, they would not want to get them. Well, it turns out they weren't really something that fit well within their Iron Dome system. So they were basically excess. They are being transferred back. I think the U.S. is buying them. They're going to end up transferring them. They're going to end up in Ukraine. Ukraine can make great use of 8 batteries. That doubles, some would say even triples, the amount of air defense they have in that specific regard. That would make a big difference in protecting critical infrastructure, power plants, some of those areas that aren't getting the more robust air defense that they actually need. So what I'm seeing is a lot of things coming out of this all at the same time. And of course, the pledge of 40 billion euros, $43 billion by NATO nations that goes into next year with Ukraine. All of this to make sure that Ukraine is not going to be lacking for support, for aid, for resources, that we won't see that huge gap like we saw this year when Congress basically didn't take action.
Yeah, I mean, Hal, back to the F-16s, though, briefly, this is quite an important distinction and stipulation that the NATO allies have made for Ukraine and Ukrainian pilots while flying their F-16s only in Ukrainian airspace. So I want to make sure we got that in there as well. But Hal, you and I have been talking about the F-16 question for, I believe, almost a year, and it's going to be a reality very, very soon there. My question to you is, will it help? Will it make a material difference for Ukraine as they fight Russia?
Oh, it'll make a huge difference. I should mention the Ukrainian airspace thing. Sounds like a big restriction right now. There's a lot of reasons why they don't want to lose an F-16 over Russian territory. Some of it dealing with the technology and things involved with the airframe. But the other thing is, if you look at what how they're going to use it, they have weapons with enough standoff capability that they don't need to fly into more defended Russian territorial airspace. They can do everything they need to do from Ukrainian airspace. And of course, when you say flying over Ukrainian territory, that includes all the territory that Russia controls, which is, that eastern Donbass region, Zaporizhia, Crimea, Kherson region that they control. So with the number of planes they have, it's not like there's going to be any idle activity, if you will, with the F-16. So a tremendous capability, particularly for air to air. One of the big things is the Russians have been using these glide bombs. They figured out what we figured out a long time ago, which is how to take dumb bombs, if you will, and you put a little, it's basically a package, a kit that you put on it that makes it into kind of a glide smart bomb. It sprouts wings and it can go a long way. And so they've been using that, and that has suddenly opened up a lot of their inventory. Part of the reason they can do that is because we haven't provided them with the air defense capabilities, specifically air-to-air defense capabilities that they needed, which is the F-16s. Now they're going to have that, and depending on what weapon systems are associated with that, that could, I'm not going to say it's going to end, but it could greatly mitigate the problems they're having with those glide bombs.
Hal, I want to read from the statement, just to allude to what you brought up about the parsing of the language about, the status of the F-16 right now. They say this, the transfer process for these F-16s is now underway, and Ukraine will be flying operational F-16s this summer. They say we're unable to provide additional details at this time due to operational security concerns there. So I wanted to make sure we got that in. Of course, we know Zelensky and Biden will be meeting tomorrow, and let's kind of suss out what that conversation might consist of, Hal. I'm hearing that Zelensky wants many of these NATO leaders to get rid of these restrictions, especially on U.S.-made weapons and how they can strike targets in Russia. We know there is a distance, a length, where they are only allowed to go inside Russian boundaries. Zelensky wants those restrictions lifted completely. Is he going to get it?
He very well might. Keir Starmer, the British prime minister, who's been British prime minister for days, just came in, pretty much basically laid out the Labour government is going to continue everything that you saw going back to Boris Johnson in terms of support for Ukraine. And one of the key things he did with the Storm Shadow missiles was he said, look, we're going to lift the restrictions on using this in Russian territory. I always find that to be an indicator, because a lot of times the British have done things regarding weapon systems and specifically using weapon systems potentially in Russian territory that they kind of precede a U.S. policy change. And they've done this many times before. And so I think the fact that he did that kind of opens the door. And I would fully expect, particularly after the strike on that children's hospital in Kyiv, this really it opens a political door as well to say, hey, look, use it to attack those places. And really the places they're looking at, there's a lot of critical infrastructure looking at, railroads and things like that supporting, but they're really looking at airfields. They want to push back that about 200 miles or more, those airfields that the Russians are able to use to send their aircraft with those glide bombs and other missiles and other things they're using. If they can push that back further, that's more lead time to intercept and possibly stop those things, but it also slows down the sortie rate. With aircraft, it's not just the aircraft and how fast they fly and what they carry. It's how fast they can turn around. They can run a mission, turn around, land, get reloaded, do another mission. If they can make them move back, say 300 miles or something, that really slows down their sortie rate. That slows down the amount of ordnance they're able to deliver. That could make a big difference, specifically on the front lines.
So, Hal, I guess my next question, because there is this pervasive sense in the atmosphere that everyone there in D.C. right now, they're in the White House, they're having a welcome dinner. All these NATO leaders acknowledge Ukraine will eventually be a member of the alliance. They don't know when, but they know they will eventually be a member here. So if you're Vladimir Putin, and maybe if Putin is watching this segment here, going over a litany of these items that have been accomplished, achieved on the agenda in the wake of the NATO summit. We've got a day left of the summit. What are you thinking if you're Putin? And if you're these NATO leaders who have made these approvals and have given these green lights on these weapon systems, the F-16s, made these announcements, why wait for the NATO summit? Why couldn't this have been announced 6 months ago?
It could have been. There's a lot of politics here, and I think they're making statements in a lot of ways. They're also, you have to remember, this is a chance to reaffirm the organizational integrity, if you will, of NATO. I mean, NATO is, and it's no understatement, it is probably more relevant today than it's been at any time since it started. I mean, this is a very functional organization, and I can tell you that for many years, particularly after the Cold War was over, NATO was, I wasn't going to say completely anachronistic, but it wasn't really wasn't the focus of effort, let's just say worldwide, because of where it is and what it was doing. Now it is a huge focus. There's a commitment there you never saw before, particularly financial commitment there you never saw before. So I think they want to hold off on some of these things. They probably say, look, can we do it this week versus last week? Let's do it this week. It has more impact, and it makes a bigger statement to Putin. And by the way, when Putin's not being arrogant on the stage, and dismissing everything, in those moments when he's alone, he's probably got to be thinking, wow, this whole thing did not go the way I had planned. Specifically when the prime ministers of Finland and Sweden are talking about how important NATO is, and they're saying, gee, Ukraine's going to be part of NATO at some day. Absolutely, this is going to happen. He's got to be thinking, this is very different than what I thought it was going to be, going back to, say, February 2022.
Yeah. I learned this today, too. There are, non-NATO member countries who still have somewhat of a quasi-NATO status, if you will. And those representatives are also in D.C. Australia, South Korea, Japan. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. Every NATO leader in every interview that I've seen gets asked about the 2024 election and what the alliance looks like after November 5th, Hal. Is that a fair question? I mean, we showed our viewers live Donald Trump in Doral, Florida, at his campaign rally last night. He went on at length about the NATO alliance, how he got so many of the members to, commit to the 2% GDP target rate there. We're learning as of the summit, 23 of the 32 member NATO states have met those commitments or exceeded them. And so are the fears and concerns that Trump will disband NATO, pull the U.S. out of NATO, withdraw support from NATO, overblown going into November when Donald Trump at the campaign rally just last night is saying that that was a success of his administration, that he got the NATO members to do just that?
Well, it's interesting when you listen to him. He's taking credit for that. And of course, and by the way, in all fairness, I'm not saying it wasn't raised in the Obama administration before him, and certainly it's been raised many, many times. But he did have a rather huge impact in getting these member states to up their contribution to NATO, and so I don't take that away. And it may be an evolving situation with him that he may decide to take great credit for NATO and maybe shift his historic position with them. I don't rule that out. I don't rule that out at all. By the way, I do think it's a fair question, but I will say this: the prime ministers, everybody there, even John Kirby, who's the White House national security spokesman, all were asked questions about this, and they all moved right away from it, did not say anything. They stayed away from U.S. politics. And I found that rather refreshing to see that sort of apolitical look. We're here for this. We're not. Right. We're not going to weigh in on domestic politics in the U.S.
But Hal, Trump takes it further, though. He says if they don't meet their 2% GDP commitment, we won't defend them. Yeah. So what does he mean by that? I mean, can he pick and choose that way? That's what's so alarming to so many people.
He can't. The NATO charter is very clear. Article 5, attack on one is an attack on all. That's the way the treaty is written. And by the way, the president can't just unilaterally go in there and pull out of that treaty. That's why we have Senate ratification of treaties, is to make it a little bit more. It's not just an agreement; it's a treaty that's been affirmed, and that's one of the hallmark treaties that we have in the international systems out there. So with that, he couldn't unilaterally withdraw. What could he do? He could do some executive decision stuff to, maybe withdraw some forces, to do a bunch of other things. But the thing is, if you look in Congress, there is phenomenal support on both sides for Ukraine. I think if you look at the vote that was taken on the Ukraine aid, you get the sense of how strong that is. And for any president, that's got to be a check and balancing, which is if you were to do something to pull back from NATO, you might see a lot of pressure coming from Congress, political pressure that would force him back the other direction. And I think that's kind of, you don't hear him say that. I mean, I don't hear any senator saying, "Hey, we're going to, hold you to it" in some very unsavory ways. But it's kind of implied with what they say.
All right, Hal Kempfer, always fun talking about the NATO alliance with you on the occasion of the NATO summit. And we'll talk soon, Hal. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.